Good morning, ladies and James, and welcome to my Logoria live stream version. So it's day 35 here in this wonderful city of death and destruction. Actually, okay, fine, it's not really death and destruction. What it is, I guess, draconian approach to controlling citizens. That's how I feel. I'm sick of being harassed when I try to enter places. I'm sick of being harassed on the street. It's just a horrible experience of having all of your movements, all of your mobility policed to such an extent. And I suppose, again, it's to the credit of the Chinese people that they have managed to hold themselves down. I'm looking out of a window right now, and I am seeing people moving about, lots of traffic, people on e-bikes, bicycles. It's Friday, March 6th here, and the sun is up, 8 a.m. So the title of this live stream is Prager the Pretender, and I thought I would give you some context for why I titled it that. I want to talk a bit about Dennis Prager, which is a subject I know very little about. I was exposed in the previous couple of years to the videos at the YouTube channel and the website he calls PragerU. And immediately I was suspect of anyone who calls themselves a university, particularly a man who likely has little more than a bachelor's degree in psychology or something. He's more or less an evangelist from what I can tell. He's a Jewish evangelist. Let's keep in mind that evangelist means bringer of good news in Greek. You is good. Angel is messenger, right? So evangelist is the good messenger, good news messenger. I don't think Jewish people can really participate in that tradition. They're not really bringing good news. They're an exclusive group, an exclusive tribe, a bloodline, and if you join the group in a secondary sense and as some kind of a lifestyle, a choice or something, then it's debatable just what exactly you've joined. Very different tradition than Christian. The Christian tradition is based on faith, based on the idea that your belief identifies you as a Christian. This is not true with Judaism. It's not true with the identity we call Jewish. That is by no means a question of having faith in distinct tenets. All you have to do is be born of a Jewish mother, apparently. Of course, it's not as simple as that. So I think it's a bit suspect right off the bat when I see that he's acting as a kind of evangelist for Judaism and has been doing so since he was around 18 years old. But when I first saw his PragerU videos, I took a lot of pleasure in them. I thought they were boldly saying things against the status quo, against the political correctness that has so dominated my adult life. And that was exciting to me. So his biography is one thing, but I want to get into I want to get into the narrative of how I ended up even talking about Prager. I received a comment on yesterday's live stream from a friend who said, the Gospels Jesus is preaching is a completion of the Old Testament. So he is fulfilling the Messiah role that was promised to the Jews through prophets like Isaiah. Jesus is constantly making references to the Old Testament. Well, that makes sense because he was speaking to the Jewish people throughout his life. Also, the new atheists are ignorant of much and dangerous. I'm not sure who that is. The two belief systems, I said there are two belief systems that's normally spoken of in terms of left and right, conservative and liberal, and I think that it's more accurate and more to the point to say that it's Jewish and Christian. Ethos, call it that. It doesn't have to be a Jewish person who is presenting the arguments, liberal or left side leaning arguments, but it's a Jewish ethos that underpins the left side, and it's a Christian ethos that underpins the right side, which is the strange thing about Prager, because he's really kind of, along with many some few Jews but in the 1970s were shifting over to a more traditional, a conservative, consistent with conservative Christians' point of view. So she says that the two belief systems are hardly at war. On the contrary, we are clinging for dear life to one another. So the two traditions of Jewish and Christian, both having a degree of religiosity and a faith and belief in God, or sharing the same God, you might say, the argument would be that in fact they do depend on and lean on each other. And someone like Prager, even though he's Jewish, because he shares the same values as many of these Christian conservatives, they feel a connection with this man, along with Ben Shapiro. Ben Shapiro is also appealing to that side of the aisle. Contemporary Jews in the U.S., many of them are Marxists, atheistic dialectical materialists, but that is a relatively recent development, the last 100 years. The last 100 years is pretty much the whole history of Jews in America. Apart from that time span, they were few and far between, much fewer than they were in Europe or that they were in the United States after the early 1900s, when a lot of them were coming from Russia in particular. So this person really likes Ben Shapiro and Prager, and I guess feels that they are heroic voices of sanity in an increasingly secular, godless society that is lost in appreciation of history. So there's some sense in which, in a Judeo-Christian sense, which is what I said yesterday, I think is a meaningless term. It's just a political strategy for finding a way to bring Christians around to accepting and toward philo-Semitism as an end. So I wrote in response, it was like 5 a.m, I woke up and I wrote, I can't approach these matters from the standpoint of the claims of the Catholic Church. I'm not a Catholic, etc. I can't address your claims with any real conviction. In all of this, this is my point that I really want to make. I am questioning the definition in terms and concepts and of folk tales that pose as historical events, like the Holocaust, because these terms play such a vital role in American politics, which is almost entirely a form of identity politics. So just a word like anti-Semitism, that word has so much power and so much influence within American politics, and yet I think there are many problems with it. And someone like Prager, someone like Shapiro, they are eager to make use of that term, and it is central to their thinking. Anti-Semitism as a concept, as a term within the available terminology, is a dominant influence in the thinking and the politics of both of those men. And that's immediately suspect. It's not dominant in the politics of their non-Jewish counterparts. It's given lip service, but it's not a dominant influence. So right there you've got an amazing rift between these two groups. One's claiming to be Jewish and one's claiming to be Christian. To say that they're hand in hand walking with the same God is, I think, an absurdity, an absolute absurdity. So, for example, if Jews are white, which is what I questioned yesterday, I don't really understand how these Jewish pundits, these Jewish talking heads like Shapiro and Prager, can at the same moment identify as white America. If Jews are white, then why might a section on an application where one is asked to identify one's race give the option of both Jewish and white? Because it comes down to an ethnic identity, doesn't it, at this point in America's development of these terms? And to say that you can be both Jewish and white is to equate Judaism with Christianity, for example, or Islam. And yet, you can't be an atheist Christian or an atheist Muslim. You can be an atheist Jew. So what is an atheist Jew? It's what they end up saying, rather than pointing to it as a race, they will say it's a culture. And so then you have like Christian culture. So a person can say, I come from the Christian culture, but I am an atheist. Still, I don't hear anyone saying I'm a Christian atheist. It's just not. So it seems to me that you can't equate these things. What it looks, in the beginning, it looks like, okay, yeah, Protestant, Catholic, Jewish, they're all sort of in the same category and they can be categorized similarly, but they can't. They really can't. They are entirely different animals. So I don't see how that's a simple idea. And what exactly is anti-Semitic? Anti-Semitic is negative sentiments directed toward Jewish people, whether they're atheist, whether they identify within the religion, or they identify within the ethnicity alone, whether the ethnicity with which they identify is. But it's just it's almost impossible to define what it means, and I think the prevalence and the power of that term begs the question of, can we equate Jewish with Christian? I think not. I think you have to draw the line there. They're two different animals, and you can't just lump them together as religions. They have completely different status, and for some reason Jewish peoples have a very different history than Christians. So how do these utterly incoherent concepts like anti-Semitism and terms enter into the American lexicon and come to wield such power in what I might say aloud? I have felt all my life really restricted by these terms. The fact that American politics is dominated by these terms is evidence of the war between Jews and Christians I mentioned, which she says is not in existence. It's a war between two ideologies that is continually reduced to left and right, but that is instead better characterized as Jew and Christian. All those loaded terms that make such little sense find their origins in a Jewish influence upon American politics. So this is my point of view. The interesting thing about Shapiro and Prager is the extent to which they seem to champion and articulate the complaints of European Americans, whites, who identify as Christians. But there are many contradictory details in their identification as Jews, and cutting to the chase, the many contradictions in the narrative they're peddling suggests Prager and Shapiro are shills for the Jewish lobbies that wish to influence American politics for the sake of minority Jewish interests by appealing to the sensibilities of the non-Jewish majority. That's pretty much my thesis, and I don't know what's true. I don't know if I'm right about that. It's not like I have spent a lot of time researching this or anything, and this is not what I do for a living, and I don't focus a lot of my time on this kind of thing. But I'm stuck here in a quarantine, and I've decided to focus my energies on a YouTube channel. And this is, wherever it takes me is where I'm going to take it. And I don't know that, I'm sure a lot of people are already talking about this, but I haven't seen anyone talking about Prager. And again, I was not even aware that he was Jewish until yesterday when I saw him sitting with the Shapiro cabal chatting at this Daily Wire website studio. And the way they spoke, I said, something's strange here. It would take too long to unpack the method and the content. I'm going to maybe try to do that a bit now. But unmasking the category of Judeo-Christian as a political scam that began in the 1930s without any authentic footing in the historical record is a start. That's what I discovered yesterday. I didn't know anything about Judeo-Christian. I've heard it all my life. It's just innocuous, as I said, non-threatening term that I have assumed was just a historical fact. There's nothing political about it. And then I looked up where I looked on Wikipedia, on one page, and one paragraph in Wikipedia, it says that the term gained popularity in America as the result of a political campaign that produced teams of ministers, Protestant ministers, Catholic priests, and Jewish rabbis. Those teams would go out into the world in whatever context, possibly speaking at auditoriums or something, and recommend the idea that America's traditions were Judeo-Christian and not simply Christian. So it was a political push to change the American mentality, probably with the idea that they were speaking honestly and accurately, but I don't think it was honest or accurate. I don't think it was accurate. I'm sure. I don't know to what extent it was honest. The term Judeo-Christian completely ignores the ideological rift that existed between Jews and Christians for at least a millennium. Why else were Jews so consistently vilified and persecuted by the Christian or Muslim majorities in the societies in which they lived? You can't have it both ways. You can't say Jews have constantly, as Prager does in his book, Why the Jews, Why Anti-Semitism, and in which he says it's the worst possible sin anyone could commit. Anti-Semitism is the worst possible sin. It's the canary in the mine, in the coal mine, that tells you when a society is evil, whether or not it's anti-Semitic. These are crazy ideas that Prager is propagating, even now. And I don't think Christians would be in agreement with that unless it was proposed to them and they felt compelled to agree, because otherwise they would be called anti-Semitic themselves. I can think of far worse things than anti-Semitism personally, and in some ways it seems that I am what they would define. It's their definition, it's their term, so I may as well embrace it. Kind of like a black person embracing the N-word, or a feminist embracing, I don't know, whatever. Oh, bitch, right? Wasn't that something that feminists did, particularly in the 90s? They embraced the word bitch. Why are we to believe it was just the inherent racism. Why all of this anti-Semitism? And this is the story. This is the Holocaust story. Are we to believe it was just the inherent racism of their majority counterparts? The Jews were living as a minority within a majority society, and the Jews didn't suffer, apparently, from racism and prejudice. They were just innocent victims of these crazy majorities who were filled with hatred for Jews. It would seem at birth. It's some kind of a genetic thing. Isn't that the story of the Holocaust, in which right-thinking Jews, free of prejudice, were persecuted by a race of people who were somehow infected with anti-Semitism at birth? That's how we present the Germans in Hollywood. That's the way our movies present Nazis. There's no explanation for why they felt that way, unless we assume it was some kind of envy, because the Jews are just so wonderful, and the Germans, who apparently were not so wonderful, felt intimidated by the greatness of the Jewish peoples around them, which, I'm sorry, it seems very unlikely. I think all of this points to a battle for domination over political terminology. So just focusing on the word anti-Semitism, there are many more words that we could focus on, but just focusing on that, there is a battle for the domination over political terminology in America. I can't speak for the rest of the world, although I suspect it's common enough all over Europe, including the weight and importance we give these items. Technical difficulties. A momentary. Just a momentary glitch. Yes, indeed. It's just a momentary glitch. So I think all of this points to a battle for terminological domination, and that's my whole interest in any of this. The terminology that we use, the words that we use. You know, I'm a scholar of literature and of languages, one might say, and it matters to me. Language is important to me, and if there are empty words or deceptive words, manipulative words that are overly present in the society in which I live, I am genuinely upset about it, and I feel that it's my responsibility to address it. So I'm not addressing Jews in any of this. I'm addressing this terminology, and it looks to me like these terms that are most confusing and most manipulative are originating in Jewish thinkers who may have their own reasons, their own traditions and values and explanations for why they are inventing and propagating a term like gender. That was, 1930s. A Jewish guy, I think in Germany, invented that one. So it's important for me to have a clear understanding of how a Jewish atheist can rationally claim to be white, but also claim to be a child of Israel. Is Israel now considered to be a European country bordered on all sides by Arabs? Or was Israel always white, like the Greeks? When did this transformation occur? How is it that these Jewish Americans are seated in a row and they're all identifying as European whites, and yet they claim to originate in Israel and to have had little, if any, muddying of their bloodline, right? Very little intermarriage between Europeans and Jews, according to the histories I've heard. much of these identity claims rest on an idea of culture that I find misleading. I really think the word culture is equally and profoundly misdirecting in American society, certainly in China. The importance that the term has taken on in American society in the previous 50 years is a further indication of the war I speak of. Prior to 60 years ago, culture was primarily a reference to a human phenomenon in which humans from any and all nations and from every ethnic origin produced disciplines, what might be called arts, culinary and otherwise, that all told and pooled together constituted evidence of human cultivation, the which we all shared. That was the meaning of culture, and that is the meaning of culture that I can get on board with. I can't get on board with the idea that what defines Jewish people, for example, is a culture. So whether or not they believe in God, anyway. Shakespeare is not the property of the British, for example, but of all races and creeds, and all should lay claim to his greatness. The same goes for Lao Tzu and his Tao Te Ching, Confucius, Plato, Aristotle, Cervantes, and so on. All of these artists, all of these great minds, great thinkers, I suppose even the great scientists, the great mathematicians, are the property of the human race. They are not the property of any one group or society. That's for governments. Let the governments think that way. But you and I, sitting here now, we are individuals, and we don't think as governments. And when we do, we think wrongly. We think in a way that is inconsistent with our actual station in life, which is as an individual, not as a member of a tribe. Which again is, in my opinion, what distinguishes this right and left thing. Even though I know that the right considers themselves a tribe. So where identity politics plays such a central role in discussions held by Prager and Shapiro on their various media platforms, these questions deserve to be asked. And what I find is a rat's nest of contradictions that looks suspiciously like a con game. Then there was another person who gave me a link to a piece that Prager wrote about JUDEO-CHRISTIan as a term, as a definition. So this is his biography. It's interesting. You know, he at the age of like 18 or 19 or something, he was sent to Soviet Russia to interview Jews to ask them about their experiences in Soviet Russia, and they were apparently being mistreated as ever. You know, it's like a Jewish personality. When were Jews not feeling persecuted? I don't know if they were persecuted, but we can certainly say definitively that there was never a time when Jews didn't feel persecuted. So he goes over to Russia and he comes back and he discovers in 1969, when he's like 21, he discovers that people actually want to hear him come and talk about his experiences in Russia when interviewing Jews there. And he's found a calling. It doesn't say anything about his education, whether he ever finished a degree. He went to Brooklyn College. Graduated in history and Middle Eastern studies. He took courses at Columbia University and so on. He left academia without finishing a graduate degree, and now he has a university named after himself. Okay, I hope there was some irony in that. So coming back, he discovers that he can make money from talking about these subjects, and he professes a certain sense of purpose in propagating the best aspects, the benefits of Judaism as a discipline, as a way of life, sort of like Buddhists recommending their way of life. He's because you can't actually, it's not about saving souls. That's what evangelism is. It's saying, you this is the only way. You must go with this God, with this story, with this Son of God, or you're going to hell. That's not the Jewish story. So in 1975, now he's like 27, with his friend, who I think is a rabbi, this guy Talushkin, who they grew up together. They wrote this book called The 9 Questions People Ask About Judaism. Then they went on to write various other books. He ran the Brandeis Barden Institute, which was like a camp for children and then for college students, and now it's become part of the American Jewish University, which itself is rather interesting. They have these think tanks. One of their think tanks at this university is just to study the Holocaust, just continually, churning out more papers, more books explaining what happened. And all they have to say about the Holocaust is that the Jews were innocent and the Nazis were evil. And they find a myriad of ways to say it over and over and over and over and over again. That's Jewish evangelism. Because what is important to the Jewish mentality is to avoid another period of persecution, to maintain their mobility, maintain their wealth, etc., maintain their freedom of movement, intellectually and otherwise. And the best way to do that is to continually engage in politics and influence the political machinery, the mechanisms around them, because they are invariably in the minority, and invariably they have to be careful that the majority doesn't turn against them. Now, why do they need to be careful that the majority doesn't turn against them? That's a more complex question. They would say it's because the majority ends up envying them. Prager actually has written a book, Why the Jews, the Reason for Anti-Semitism, and that's the main idea behind it. It even says it here. It depicts anti-Semitism as a sinister form of flattery. The authors wrote that hatred of Jews arises from resentment over Jews' acceptance of the doctrine that they are God's chosen people, charged with bringing a moral message to the world. And that is one thing. I was looking through this book, and the fact that he points to Jews as a nation, again, is a confusing approach for me. He's an American. He's a member of 2 different nations. It's a nation within a nation. I don't know. So the article that was mentioned about JUDEO-CHRISTIAN, I thought we could look at that maybe. The United States of America is the only country in history to have defined itself as JUDEO-CHRISTIAN. Well, that's only because in the 1930s they were Jewish leaders were worrying that anti-Semitism was growing. It was certainly growing in Nazi Germany in that period. It was growing all over the world actually in that period. And they didn't yet have a Holocaust to point to demonize anti-Semites. I don't even know if they had the term anti-Semitic as yet. I suppose they did. But it certainly didn't have the cachet and the coinage that it has presently, the term anti-Semite. So he's saying that the only country in history to have defined itself, it didn't define itself that way. It defined itself as Christian. This movement, this political movement, instigated by Jewish leaders who brought the Protestant and Catholic leadership into the same mission, and attempted to actually just change the in the middle, sort of just cut loose from the assumptions that Americans had made till that time, and to make a kind of an argument that in fact all along when they said they were a Christian nation, Americans, they were actually mistakenly failing to say they were Judeo-Christian Americans. So I don't think that sentence is accurate, and I think it's a bit of a manipulation, which is what I'm worried about with Prager. While the Western world has consisted of many Christian countries and consists today of many secular countries, only America has called itself Judeo-Christian. Okay, we've said the same thing again. America, I guess the more times you say it, the easier it is for me to believe it. The more times I hear it, the more I assume it must be true. Given the fact that only up until yesterday I wouldn't have even asked whether or not it's what importance is it? And I was, taught this in the university. I would have just assumed, it's like he's preaching to the choir. Americans aren't even going to question this. Why would they? We don't see the political content, but it's there. And the political content is the usual Jewish content. To avoid anti-Semitism, we need to find positions and make arguments that, in this case, bring Christians and Jewish people together, such that if you're anti-Semitic, you're hating yourself, because you're Judeo-Christian. How can you hate the Judeo part of yourself? America is also unique in that it has always combined secular government with a society based on religious values. That's not unique. All over Europe and Middle East, it's just, there's nothing unique. But what does Judeo-Christian mean? We need to know. Along with the belief in liberty, as opposed to, for example, the European belief in equality. This is ridiculous. It's the French who were talking about liberté, libertad. This is the French concept. He's making out as if it's an American thing and that had no connection in Europe. Europe was just about equality. The Muslim belief in theocracy, oh really? Is that what the Muslim belief is in some distinct way? And the Eastern belief in social conformity, I would say if anything falls within an Eastern belief, it's the Jewish point of view. And the Jewish point of view is all about social conformity. Even in Prager's books, he's saying the thing that makes Judaism so great is to follow the law, follow the Jewish law. That's social conformity. The whole Jewish identity is based around social conformity, and it derives from the East. Again, another paragraph with just completely inaccurate characterization of the world we live in. Judeo-Christian values are what distinguish America from all other countries. I would say what distinguishes America from all of the countries, if anything, is its history and the influence, the translation of Christian values that the founders possessed. None among them were Jewish. The Christian values quite distinct from the Jewish values. In fact, the Christian values are a new covenant, right? A separation from, a breaking away from, a rejection of the Jewish values of tribalism. Unfortunately, of course, once you build a church, once you establish a church, you've created a new tribe. So Christianity has been fighting itself, wrestling with itself, with its own self-contradictory message since the beginning, due to the fact that a church is an institution and Christianity, Jesus's words are essentially, let the institutions go. The only institution you need is in your heart. The grammar of the God's message is written on your heart. That's Jesus's point of view. The church is kind of a bastardization of that idea, a very Jewish point of view, actually, and no surprise given that the church fathers were Jews, Paul among them, who was Saul. So that is why American coins feature these two messages: in God we trust and liberty. It's just complete hokum. There is no fact of the matter there. That's complete. This is a guy who never went to university. Definitely a guy who is just inventing things that sound good. He's probably come up with these ideas during his lecture circuit, the Billy Graham of the Jews. And it's about as accurate historically as some preacher preaching about the Bible. Yet for all its importance and its repeated mention, Judeo-Christian, its repeated mention, since the 1930s when they had this political push this strategy to stop anti-Semitism. The term is not widely understood, okay? It urgently needs to be, because it is under ferocious assault. And if we do not understand it, we will be unable to defend it. Oh my goodness, Judeo-Christian is equal in kind to America or American. If we don't understand Judeo-Christian, we'll lose America. And if we cannot defend it, America will become as amoral as France, Germany, Russia, et al. So it's all about morality now. It's a system of morality that he's pointing to. The morality of America is founded on Judeo-Christian. Now, in the instant that you say Judeo-Christian, you have stressed, you have made more important, it's the word, you have highlighted the Judeo, because then the Christian rests on top of the Judeo. The Christian is the little brother, he's piggybacking on the big brother. The big brother has trained and revealed all of these things about the world to the little brother, and now the little brother goes out into the world, no longer a Jew, but related, a cousin, a brother of Judeo, the younger brother, of course. The older brother is the wiser older brother. Poppycock. So Judeo-Christian America has differed from Christian countries in Europe in at least two important ways. Well, the first way is that Judeo-Christian they didn't have a campaign in Europe to propagate the term Judeo-Christian, because they didn't have Jews who were as aggressive. The Jews in Europe were not as aggressive in the way that the American Jews were, but Americans generally are aggressive. One is the Christians who founded America saw themselves as heirs to the Old Testament, the Hebrew Bible, as much as to the New, and even more importantly, they strongly identified with the Jews. Well, the Hebrew Bible, the Old Testament, the New Testament takes on this idea of the chosen people. It takes on the idea that we have the good news and we need to spread the good news. It's our responsibility as Christians to witness to the world this wonderful truth that has been revealed to us by none other than God Himself in the form of His Son. I mean, that's a different take, a completely different take. It's like we've got the information. We are God's chosen, the newly chosen, not the old. I mean, if the Jews want to, they can come join us and be with God. But we are going to go out into the world and we are going to draw everyone to us. That was never the Jewish idea. The Jews were not evangelical. They were, staying in their own little enclaves. They married each other. They didn't marry outside of the clan. They were their own little tribe, and they would always remain that way as best they could. So I think, the point of this was and I don't remember who first talked about being the light on the hill. Americans from the beginning said, we will show the rest of the world how to build a nation in which all men are created equal, and so on and so forth. That was that sense of a mission, but that's a completely different mission than anything the Jews had ever possessed. The Jews were only about dominating and forcing people to accept the Jews as the leaders, but not able to join those leaders. Christianity had a very different idea. You can come be one of us. There's no bloodline. There's no matrilineal descent here. You just, in the moment that you say, I believe Jesus is my Savior, you're in. And that was never the case. Even looking now at Israel, it's a completely different ball game. You've got to prove a bloodline in order to become an Israeli citizen. Founders and other early Americans probably studied Hebrew, the language of the Old Testament, at least as much as Greek, the language of the New. There is some truth in that, but only because the language of the Old Testament, because the language of the Old Testament was Hebrew, not because the Judaism was the issue. It was not about Judaism. at least as much as Greek. I'm sorry, you're not even mentioning Latin. Greek and Latin were the languages. Hebrew was a stepbrother. It was very much on the periphery in comparison to Latin and Greek, and for a reason. And by the way, Greek was not a descendant of Judeo. If you're going to talk about what the West comes out of, I'd say Greco-Christian. Let's go Greco-Christian. How about that? Greco-Romani Christian, maybe. Judeo, no. Yale, founded in 1701, adopted a Hebrew insignia, and Hebrew was compulsory at Harvard until 1787. What is this telling us? That somehow, how many Jews were there, okay, in America at that time? How much of Jewish population was involved in this? Or was it just a matter of studying classic texts? It's like, imagine Greek people making an argument now that, look at all the people in the West that were studying Greek. What you have here is a Greco-Christian tradition or something of the kind. They don't do that because they don't evangelize in the way that Jews do. Jews' evangelism is actually, you can't use the word evangelism. It's not good news. What would be bad news? They're the bringers of bad news. The Holocaust is coming. The people are evil. The people can't be trusted. The people need to be controlled. Their thought processes need to be controlled. That's the evangelism of the Jew. It's the malangelism, the bad message. It's the sky is falling. That's the evangelism of the Jew, not the good news, which is that you are saved. The good news is all you got to do is believe and you're saved. You're with God. It's in your heart. Why? Why is this true? Because you're human. That's how Christian and Greek, the Greek tradition and the Christian tradition came together so nicely. When you read Plato, it sounds like Jesus talking, and vice versa. Although Plato preceded Jesus, who knows? Maybe Jesus read Plato and said, hey guys, I found a better book than the one you keep pushing on me, better than the Torah. Possible. It's possible. Should I go on with this? I'm getting excited. The words on the Liberty Bell, proclaim liberty throughout the land, are from the Torah. I can't say yes or no, can I? I'm not in a position to say that's ridiculous, but that sounds ridiculous. And in any case, from the Torah, no, from the Old Testament. Can I just, okay, now I can say this. It's not from the Torah, it's from the Old Testament. That's a very different fact of the matter. And this is how this Prager guy is trying to manipulate people. Vast numbers of Americans took Hebrew names. Well, of course, that was not just Americans, it was Europe generally, because of the names, in the Bible, in the Christian Bible. Not because Jews had some special place in their hearts, or in their psychologies, or in their philosophy either. The consequences included a strong Old Testament view of the world, certainly because it was a strong biblical view of the world, which included the New Testament and included the idea, if they wanted it, that the Old Testament was what the New Testament had broken away from. It was the true liberation was the New Testament liberating us from the old tribalist point of view, the old law handed down by men. Okay, that's not sure that works. I can't go on with it. I gotta calm down. I'm completely alone here. I'm getting very excited. All alone in my room. What is that Beach Boys song? In my room. So Jews are both a member of a nation and followers of a religion, which is he says, that's his point of view. Okay, so significance of the belief. Damn it. The consequences of this wonderful Torah's influence included a strong Old Testament view of the world, meaning in part a strong sense of fighting for earthly justice, an emphasis on laws, a belief in a judging as well as a loving and forgiving God. You've just lost me completely. Come on, it's eye for an eye, tooth for a tooth in the Old Testament, and then it's just ask for forgiveness, and it's yours in the New Testament. They're two very different points of view, and he's lumping them together. And a belief in the chosenness of the Jews, which America identified with. Isn't that funny? So America apparently from the very beginning thought, oh, those Jews are chosen. Americans are chosen, but not as much as the Jews. The Jews were first. God liked the Jews first, and then later he liked the Americans. Poppycock. This sense of mission, the significance of this belief cannot be, it accounts for the mission that Americans have uniquely felt called to spread liberty in the world. No, I'm sorry, that's a Christian thing. That, yes, it comes out of the Jewish thing, but it's a completely different, it's a transformed idea once the Christians take it on. The idea of bringing the world together is very different from what Jews were spreading. Again, I think one good way to look at it is, for the Christians, there's good news. You're one of us. Just say the word. For the Jews, it's bad news. You're not one of us, but you've got to recognize that God loves us, and if you do bad things to us, bad things will happen to you. It's a bad world you live in if you do bad things to us. We are the canary in the coal mine. Anything happens to us, and it reflects back on you. This sense of mission is why more Americans have died for the liberty of others than any other nation's soldiers. Good God, that's just, Russians, the number of Russians who died in World War II, just that alone, in comparison to the American, it wasn't America's war, it was Russia's war, World War II. It's such an absurd statement. He's going out so far on a limb just to make this point of, anti-Semitism is stupid. Anti-Semitism is shooting yourself in the foot. If you're an American, anti-Semitism is shooting yourself in the foot. That's just a lie. It's a complete lie. In fact, this influence that Jewish thought has had over America only began in the 1950s, and for very specific historical, physical reasons to do with immigration and so on. That's how far back this great Judeo influence, and it pretty much follows the same point, the same tide that the political push to bring the idea of Judeo-Christian into the United States had, the same movement. It is why those who today most identify with the Judeo-Christian essence. Now we're getting into the essence of America. America is the spirit of America. Are more likely to believe in the moral worthiness of dying to liberate countries. Because of that Jewish thing, that Jewish influence of sacrificing themselves for Palestine, for example. Not only Europe, but Korea, Vietnam, and Iraq. What about Palestine, by the way? And Iraq is liberating. How many? Like 1 million people died in a decade in order to liberate Iraq from its oil barons, so that we could become its oil barons. That is why America stands alone in protecting two little countries threatened with extinction, Israel and Taiwan. So that's why America keeps trying to protect Israel. It's the Christians in America who keep trying to protect Israel. It's not Jewish lobbies. It's not private funding from Jews. It's not Jewish lobbies convincing lawmakers and legislators to funnel the better part of foreign aid to Israel. Like if you look at like the decade of the 80s, the money that went to Israel was equal in amount as the money that went to every other place in the world from America's coffers. We who are deep in debt, by the way. That is why conservative Americans are more likely to believe in American exceptionalism. Where is the that? Okay, those who today identify with Judeo-Christians are conservative Americans and are more likely to believe in American exceptionalism. This sentence doesn't even logically make sense. It is why those who today most identify with the Judeo-Christian essence of America are more likely to believe. Okay, that is why. The sense of mission is why conservative Americans... Okay, now it does make sense to me. The sense of mission is why conservative Americans are more likely to believe in American exceptionalism, in not seeking, as President Bush put it, a permission slip from the United Nations, let alone from Europe. So our sense of mission in America, and I didn't know this, isn't this funny? This man is actually telling me something I didn't know, that all of the good things about my Americanness come from the Jews. Isn't that wonderful? What an amazing group of people. Is it any wonder then that they make me feel intimidated and threatened such that I become anti-Semitic? They're so amazing. Is it any wonder that I am threatened by them? Jealous, envious. I flatter them. The second meaning of Judeo-Christian is a belief in the biblical God of Israel. Well, you could go across the country and find a lot of churches talking this way, but the God of Israel, it kind of contradicts the whole idea. In his 10 commandments and his biblical moral laws, it is a belief in universal, not relative, morality. But it's a God of Israel. The God of Israel. So the God of Israel chose the Israelites to be the leaders of the world. That's the idea here. The God of Israel said, how will I begin my mission to bring all of humanity around to worshiping and understanding my expectations? I guess I will go to the Israelites, because the Israelites will do the best job of organizing my campaign as God, as a kind of president of the world, as a king. Yeah. It is a belief in universal, not relative morality. Although, it's funny how there's so much is relative when we start talking about cultures, isn't it? So much is relative. And what a great tragedy it is when a culture is lost, we say. And we go on about what a great loss it is. That doesn't seem like a universality to me. It is a belief that America must answer morally to this God, not to the mortal, usually venal governments of the world. I see. So America must answer morally to the God of Israel, and the God of Israel believes the Jews are chosen, which indirectly America must answer morally to the Jews. Wow, that's wonderful. It's really good to know. And all those other governments, they're not Jewish, right? No. Those other governments, mortal and venal. Why mortal? Oh, okay, yeah, because they're going to die, but not God, not the Jews. That is why those who most affirm okay, tell me more, man, tell me more. Judeo-Christian values lead the fight against redefining marriage. Oh, this is a special, this is his rosebud. And this is the thing, his real mission, that he came up against the world of American leftist politics most profoundly when he began to say that homosexuality shouldn't be normalized and marriage between homosexuals was a matter of opening a door. I agree with this, by the way. I don't think I'm not a proponent of gay marriage. I think it should be called garage, for one thing. Fine, make a legal document, but call it garage. Don't call it marriage. Let those straight people have their marriage, gay guys. You're the ones who talks about wanting to have your gay stuff. Well, there's a culture, heterosexual culture, that you should allow to retain its own sense of identity. Well, anyway, so he throws in this bit. This is that more of the Judeo-Christian values is against redefining marriage. How do you like that? We believe, we being Jews and Christians. Where are the Muslims in all of this? You know, isn't it interesting? If you look through Prager's videos and all of it, there's so much anger and hatred toward Islam. It's such a common thing, and so consistent. And Judeo-Christian, not only does it bring in the Jewish point of view as kind of the father figure of the Christians, that the Jewish is the father figure, but it excludes the Muslims. And of course, the Muslims are the great threat to Israel, aren't they? To the country of Israel. So the more you can turn America against the Muslims, well, the safer Israel is. Because then America is their big brother with the big stick, going to beat back those Muslims if they try to do harm to the Israelis. However much harm Israelis do to the Muslims, which is quite a lot. We believe, that a pillar of Judeo-Christian values is to encourage the man-woman sexual and marital ideal, and to provide children with the opportunity to benefit from the unique gifts that a man and a woman give a child, gifts that are never replicable by two men alone or two women. Hey, I'm with you. I'm totally with you. You know, romance is a man-woman thing in my world. Gay people can hate me, right along with them, but where does this we believe stuff come in, and how did it have anything to do with Judeo-Christian? That is why those who most affirm Judeo-Christian values, most affirm. And what were those values? Well, it had to do with being chosen and having a message and wanting to propagate that message. Evangelism, in short, yeah. But it's bad news. To the extent that we propagate the message of the Holocaust, for example, which is one of the main ideas behind American Jewish University. It's an area of study. Why did the Holocaust happen? What's wrong with those white non-Jews? What's happening there? Just gets me too excited. That is why those who most affirm Judeo-Christian values are unmoved by the idea that the war in Iraq is moral. It's not, but immoral if they oppose. It's moral if these countries say so, but immoral if they oppose it. They know it's immoral either way. We ask first what God and the Bible would say about liberating Iraq, not what Syria and other members of the UN Security Council say. Look, I'm sorry, this is manipulation. This guy is just manipulating Christians to get on board with him. That's all this is. This is not a man seeking the truth. This is a charlatan. This is a charlatan. Prager the pretender. Charlatan extraordinaire. That is why those who most affirm, now we have some that just kind of affirm it, and then we have the ones that really affirm the Judeo-Christian thing, believe that war, while always tragic, is on more than a few occasions a moral duty. Like this, what was it called? The 6-Day War? Israel's done a lot of fighting as a moral duty, getting all those pesky, dirty little Palestinians out of that country that they first agreed to just cut it down the middle, didn't they? But no, got to get them all out of there and build a big wall too. Oh yeah, that's a war of a kind, isn't it? Nothing Judeo ever sanctioned pacifism. He's proud of that. certainly if you look at the Old Testament, it's just an endless display of genocide. The Jews are constantly trying to genocide people. God is always telling them, kill them all off. Kill every one of them. Make it so that their seed will no longer prosper. They will be completely erased from the planet. This is what God tells the Jews to do in the Old Testament. So he's right. Judeo never sanctioned pacifism. Of course, the Hebrew prophet Isaiah yearned for the day that nations will beat their swords into plowshares. But another Hebrew prophet, Joel, who is never cited by those who wish to read the secular value of pacifism into the Bible, said precisely the opposite. Oh, well, isn't that wonderful? Pacifism, bad. War, good. Interesting. Beat your plowshares into swords and your pruning hooks into spears. Let the weaklings say, I am strong. Well, how do you like that, Joel, really? See, what's funny about that is, why does no one cite Joel? Because it's not because they're Christians. And it's a Christian thing to say, turn the other cheek, man. And turn the other cheek is what informs America, despite all these horrible things that America has done, particularly in the 20th century. It's turn the other cheek that brings in the hope of equality. Forgiveness is the backbone of the political experiment that was America. And however abandoned these ideas have been, that's the reason why it can't be Judeo-Christian. Because Judeo-Christian cannot accommodate, turn the other cheek, and love your enemies. And forgive, meaning forget. They're the same thing. The battle over whether America remains Judeo-Christian, I say it never was. It never was, and all that Judeo-Christian actually means is everything that, gay marriage, that's Judeo. That's Judeo-Christian. That's the true Judeo-Christian. Anti-Semitism as a political tool, as the most powerful political tool in America, that's Judeo. And you can call it Judeo-Christian because the Judeo manipulates the Christians to get on board with these things. Or, this is how they what is the word for that? They hold the Christians hostage with threats of hate, of hate in their hearts. If you don't do what we say, then you'll have hate in your heart. I will prove to you that you have hate in your heart unless you agree to what I do. And the Christians, they're not cool with that. They cannot, and we can call it just a culture if you want, Christian culture. People out of that culture, the last thing, the worst possible thing that they could be is hateful. So that's been the whole game since the 1950s, is to wag that finger and say there's hate in your heart. And then Christians, people within that Christian ethos are going to very quickly say, how do I redeem myself? I must reform. That reformist spirit. It's not, hatred is perfectly all right within the Jewish community. You hate your enemies. That's why Jesus felt the need to say this to his Jewish community. Because the opposite was what they were living by. And it's what America lives by now. So that was a bust, man. That really, I don't know if I'm making any sense. I can see that no one is even paying attention to me. DJ Simon Wells. We don't have the voice to change anything in this life. Well, you don't really seek the truth to change society. As I've tried to say before, I'm not here to make society a better place. I'm here to reclaim the vocabulary that is pointing toward the truth. I want that vocabulary. I don't want the vocabulary that they're giving me and that they've given me since, birth. A term like anti-Semitism directs me away from the truth, and it reverberates through all of my vocabulary like a spider's web. It vibrates through the other definitions until those definitions are blurred and unclear. Words like that, and the more power they take on in society, the greater the vibration and the more blurred everything becomes, until you're just following whatever dogmatic demands they make of you, because you can't reason, you can't think logically if the terms you have to work with are inaccurate. Anti-Semitism, that's what could I say? How could I say it more strongly? As a concept, as a term, anti-Semitism is the obstacle that in Hebrew the word Satan meant obstacle. That word is the obstacle to seeing the world for what it is. And when I say seeing the world is human. As much as we're going to see of the world, or clearly, accurately, is the extent to which we understand and are in conformity with human nature. Anti-Semitism as a concept is completely against human nature. And that essay just now where he's claiming all this in common between Christianity and Judaism, that's totally out of keeping with human nature. So I would go so far as to say that. So this is his first book he wrote with his pal he went to high school with, The 9 Questions People Ask About Judaism. The Intelligent Skeptic's Guide to Judaism. Herman Wouk, famous novelist, writes a little introduction saying, "You go, boys, excellent work, quite a good book." We'll jump right over that. So he had, he didn't entirely go out of Judaism, but he was no longer practicing, following all of the precepts and laws of Judaism, and then he comes back to it. Now he's only like 25, 26 years old, so people often ask me why I returned to Judaism. Imagine some 25-year-old making this statement. He's a boy. From my standpoint, this boy is acting like he went far away from Judaism. I saw the rest of the world, I tell them. That's a rather prejudicial statement. The rest of the world doesn't compare to Judaism. When I hear Christians say something like this, or for that matter, let's just slow down a second. We're supposed to think in some ways, and I know that they're not comfortable. Prager isn't comfortable with this, but in some ways, Jew and white are on the same plane. They're two categories, ethnic identities that deal with race. Jewish is a race in many contexts. It certainly is a race in Israel, where you have to have a certain blood connection in order to become a citizen. So he's essentially saying that the rest of the world, these other races, I forgot what I was going to say. I had a good point. This answer, and he's good. He's going to qualify this. This answer is meant neither to denigrate other cultures, as cultures, or religions, nor to be flippant. But the more I come to know and experience the world and its history in all of my 25 years, the more I come to venerate Judaism and the nation which it has produced. So Judaism has produced a nation, and America is also a nation. I can't quite, I'm sure they have good answers. I wish I could hear their answer to how you can have loyalty to two distinct nations. I don't see how it's possible. I remember walking around the exquisite Indonesian island of Bali, seeing men gathered everywhere cheering at cockfights. Oh, those barbarians, those primitives. You'd never see a Jew doing that. Watching animals scratch each other's eyes out was as entertaining to these men as a baseball game was to me, and as morally unproblematic for them. Which brings me to the heart of the issue. From an early age, I have been obsessed by issues of good and evil. Okay, whatever. How can we make a better, kinder, finer human being? And his answer is to follow Judaism It's the best way to make the best kind of human being. Apparently, these laws within Judaism are the most consistent with human nature, in his view. I wasn't looking for God. I wasn't looking for the light. I wasn't looking for some Buddhist perfection. It's taken me through 60 countries. It brought me back to Judaism. I believe it offers the best answers to the terrible problem of how to achieve goodness among a race of beings not strongly predisposed to its achievement. Interesting use of race there. I'm assuming he means the human race, human beings. If I were not convinced of this, I would not actively identify with, let alone advocate, Judaism. So it's good that he throws in the idea that this is for the human race. Judaism, which is actually a bloodline, okay, maybe not completely. You can join us if you want, but you're always kind of an outsider, whatever. You couldn't just join Israel unless you, well, I don't know, if you convert, whatever, who cares? I'm getting off the subject. If I were not convinced of this, I would not actively identify with, let alone advocate, Judaism. After the Holocaust, and in an open society, who's the open society? George Soros, of course. One needs powerful reasons to be a Jew. Interesting. He needs a powerful reason to be a Jew. I thought he couldn't help but be a Jew. If he grew up in that culture, he's a Jew. Isn't that the idea? It's not a race, it's a culture. It's not a religion, it's a culture. So you can be an atheist Jew. You can't not be a Jew. You can't suddenly say, yes, I grew up in that culture, I'm identified by that culture, but I reject the identity. Just as I can't reject the identity of being white without just being trivial. The Jewish people is a messenger who forgot his message. And Mr. Prager is here to tell the Jewish people what the message is again. How wonderful to have that purpose in life. There's this Emmanuel Raceman. God may have his own reasons for denying us certainty with regard to his existence and nature. One reason apparent to us is that man's certainty with regard to anything is poison to his soul. So he likes the idea of skepticism. He believes that that in some way defines the Jewish mentality. And, of course, what's the opposite of that? Well, that's the Christian fanatic. In fact, fanaticism is an aspect of the Christian personality. You could call it a neurosis. And skepticism, being able to doubt God's existence and yet remain a Jew because you follow the Jewish laws, is distinctive to Judaism. That's part of the reason that they talk about being a nation, because they are Jewish based on the various ways that they could identify as Jewish, and it has nothing to do with belief in God as it does with Christianity. We must begin our presentation of Judaism with a discussion about God. Can you doubt God's existence? Well, of course you can. You can have a crisis of faith because Judaism emphasizes deed over creed. So maybe you're an atheist, but as long as you're following the rules, following the laws, better that they, the Jews, abandon me, says God, but follow my laws. That seems, again, a very distinct difference between Judaism and Christianity. Incredibly different. Absolute certainty and faith leads to fanaticism. Isn't that something? So the Christian point of view, the Christian approach, is actually the negative approach. And this is the Judeo-Christian point of view, I suppose, right? That the Christians should stop being fanatics. He's giving us logical arguments for why we can doubt God's existence. The need to posit God's existence. Morality necessitates positing God's existence. If there is no God, there are no rights and wrongs that transcend personal preference. Gases and molecules, the laws of nature are not good or evil, right or wrong. If the natural world is the one objective reality and there is no moral source beyond nature, good and evil possess no objective reality. Moral judgments then become purely subjective. So apparently he thinks that it's morally responsible to believe God underpins. Adolf Eichmann and other Nazi murderers, isn't it funny how within a few pages we get Nazis? I tell you, Nazis have done more to define Jewish identity than any other influence in the history of the Jewish peoples. Acted reasonably when they obeyed orders to murder people and thereby furthered their careers. When the average German citizen remained silent while his Jewish neighbors were shipped to concentration camps, he was acting entirely according to reason. Reason suggested preserving one's life and not endangering it by aiding a Jew. It may in fact be argued that among the only people in Nazi Germany who acted against reason were those who acted morally. What a profound example. And isn't it wonderful that he manages to get that dig in there, right? That dig. And at once he manages to place the Jewish identity in the position of the innocent victim who was just dependent on people's morality, which they lacked, and they gave themselves over completely to reason, which is, of course, part of the tradition of the Greek Roman humanities. Reason was kind of reason was considered to be a kind of morality. Reason would lead us to the kindest, the best response. He's saying no, which once again illustrates the huge rift, the great difference between Judeo and Christian. On the Christian side, you've got all this influence of the Greeks, far more than you have it from the Old Testament. To cite a more mundane example, according to the New York Times, 1 out of every 3 hotel guests steals something from his room. According to the New York Times, okay? Since it is here, this is another way that I find it very interesting when I'm reading articles like this or observations like this written by a Jewish person. He's talking, let's just put it in the context. He's talking about Americans. Americans at this point when he's writing this are probably like 4% Jewish. That's probably a high number, maybe less. 4% of the population was Jewish. He's talking about the entire population of America, so he's talking about non-Jews. Am I wrong? If he's talking about just generally this is what happens in the world, and I identify as this incredibly distinct and rare minority, then when I talk about the general population of even the place in which I grew up, in which I was born and raised, I'm still speaking as an alien. I'm speaking outside of that group that I'm talking about. So when he says 1 out of every 3 hotel guests, he's not talking about the people he identifies as. He is talking not his tribe. He is talking about that other tribe. That tribe that ultimately, in the terms that he's offered us, and he's just given us the Nazis, paragraph just before we got the Nazis, that population, that greater population of Americans is a threat in every year, every moment, because they might just turn on this tiny little group of Jews who have so much influence. Even as we read this book and its popularity shows us, does its popularity compare, how many non-Jews are reading his book? If it's popular, he's a Jew talking to non-Jews, telling them what to think about Judaism. So even in this moment, he is talking about the non-Jew and what the non-Jew does. And the non-Jew is a threat. The non-Jews' thinking must be controlled. If they are allowed to think on their own, it is very likely that even genetically, they are prone to become racists and envious of the Jewish position within their midst. Since it is probable that most of these people consider stealing immoral, are we to assume that millions of Americans consider themselves thieves? No. Undoubtedly, most will deny that what they have done is thievery. They rationalize their actions by claiming that the hotel overcharges, or that everyone else also takes souvenirs, or that the towel or ashtray or painting will not be missed. This is interesting as also the Germans who didn't protect the Jews did so out of reasoning. One guesses that the Jews weren't dependent on reason. The Jews were dependent on morality, on laws that defined and delimited morality for them, not on reason. And the greater population that he speaks of in America, that the New York Times is talking about, that greater population is also dependent and rationalizing, dependent on reason, and rationalizes its way into immoral actions through reason, but not the Jews. Judaism is the topic. Reason is amoral. It is a human tool that can be used as easily for evil as for good. Now, is this what Judaism believes? I don't know. Reason cannot demand good behavior, even when it suggests it. The preceding example should make it obvious that if reason often does not even suggest good behavior, it cannot possibly be relied upon to demand good behavior. And even when reason does argue for moral behavior, it is not reason that compels a person to act morally. Reason may very well have suggested to many Germans during World War II that they actively opposed Nazism, and to many Americans that they not steal from their hotel rooms, but it in no way would compel them to act accordingly. For the few Germans who did actively oppose Nazism, it was not reason that dictated their moral behavior. It was a recognition of something higher than reason that compelled them to act morally. Thus, given these two facts, that reason can suggest evil and that it cannot compel good behavior, such a wonderfully astute argument, eh? He's using reason. Isn't it funny that he's appealing to reason and telling us why reason cannot lead us to morality? You would think that in this moment, reason is leading him to instruct us on morality, isn't it? Thus, given these two, it's not facts, these are arguments. Reason can suggest evil, and it cannot compel good behavior. We can accurately characterize the notion that reason alone will produce moral. Can characterize the notion that reason as a dangerous myth. To return to our original question, if there is no God whose moral will transcends personal opinion, then we cannot say that Hitler was morally wrong. All we can say is, I don't like it. So once again, we're back on Hitler. We just can't get away from this Holocaust thing. Everything centers around it. Every argument, even as we're talking about God, we've got to talk about the Holocaust. We've got to talk about the Nazis and what they did to the Jews. Because goodness knows, that's the big event in God's life. The source of morality must itself be moral, and since reason is amoral, it cannot be the source of morality. That source must be something higher than reason. And all of this he gets, isn't it wonderful? All of this reason tells him. From the time the Jews stood at Mount Sinai to this day, that higher source has been called God. Hallelujah, hallelujah. The Jews have saved us all. Ultimate purpose. Morality is not the only value whose existence is dependent upon positing the existence of God. If the physical world is the only reality, if there is no metaphysical source to life, then life is ultimately purposeless. Life is then nothing more than the chance result of innumerable coincidences, and human beings are nothing more than self-aware molecules. We differ from all other molecular combinations only in that we want to believe that our particular combination has some ultimate meaning and purpose. This desire is mere delusion. We simply cannot bear to awaken each morning and look in the mirror at a molecular coincidence, so we make up a meaning to our lives. The purposelessness of life, if there is no God, is not some argument created by theologians. It is a fact, and it underlies all secular existentialist thought. The argument of secular existentialism develops as follows. Given that God does not exist, life is mere physical coincidence with no meaning. Hence, we must endow our being and nothingness, to use the well-chosen words of Jean-Paul Sartre, with some arbitrary meaning, or we cannot survive the pain of life. He's really assuming that the humanities, or humanism, has no good arguments to offer, and he's somewhere between nihilism and theism. And he seems to think that these are the only choices. And by presenting these two choices, either you do this or you do that. Either you come back away from the ledge or you jump off. He seems to think he's making a good argument. For the Jews, the physical world is very real, but it is not the only reality. There is a metaphysical reality as well. Well, that's not true for the many atheistic Jews that populate America. I mean, probably most Jews in America are atheists. They identify as Jews and as atheists. So none of this actually applies to them. I guess he would have to say something like practicing Jews. I wonder what what is the percentage? If someone could look that up and put it in the comments. By the way, when I'm doing all of this, I can't see the comments. So if you say something and I don't respond, it's because I don't know how to. No one's even no one's even looking at what I'm doing. Who am I talking? Who am I talking to? I think it's just hilarious the way he words these things. For the Jew, I told the story a couple of videos back. I think it ended up in the video, maybe it didn't, about a teacher of mine no, I don't think I ever did post it. A teacher of mine who told me not to say the Jew, the old Jew. There was an old man I met in Times Square when I was like 19. And he said, I'm just an old Jew, I don't know anything. And he was talking about these crazy Christians in Times Square with their placards and their megaphone. They were yelling that everyone was going to hell. And this guy just walked up and stood next to me, and he was an old man, and he just was chatting away with me. And he was the first Jewish person I'd ever met. And it didn't mean anything to me. I thought Jewish was like Baptist or something. It was just another sect of the Protestantism. I had no idea. So I went on about my business. I went back and I wrote a short story that included this encounter in Times Square, and I gave it to this writing teacher, and she was appalled that I had written the old Jew. How, never say that. You can never say Jew. And I was like, what do I say? You can say, you shouldn't even talk about them, but you could say Jewish. This was a woman who married a famous Jewish poet, and she converted to Judaism, and they raised their children as Jews, and I suppose she identifies now as a Jew, strangely enough. But to see then, he just writes for the Jew, whereas I would be told if I say the Jew this or that, when I say the Jew even now, and when I'm just talking and I say Jews this or that, I feel like I'm saying the N-word. I know that people are very sensitive to this. Happily, no one's even paying attention to what I'm doing here, so. It's not the only, there is a metaphysical reality as well. The source of this metaphysical reality, God, has created the physical reality and has endowed the human being with a touch of the divine. This element can be called spirituality or soul or the image of God or sanctity. By any name, it means the same. We are not purposeless physical creations of a cruel and apathetic universe, but purposeful spiritual creations of a loving and just God. In order then to spread a universal standard of good and evil in the world, and because the death of belief in God must lead to moral chaos and a pervasive sense of meaninglessness, the Jew must posit and advance ethical monotheism even when he is in doubt about God. God's existence is demonstrably necessary for a moral world and for ultimate meaning to life. Nevertheless, one may conclude that while God's existence is clearly necessary, belief in God's existence is irrational and even perhaps impossible. Interesting. I don't know. I'm getting tired. It's been like an hour and 15 minutes or something. And there's another book of his that I wanted to look at. Just the title page is hilarious. Why the Jews? The Reason for Anti-Semitism, the Most Accurate Predictor of Human Evil. Where does he get off with these crazy... Jews generally, where do they get off with this kind of stuff? Why the Jews? In the end, what he says is that these people are just envious. This is a curious statement. It was Judaism that brought the concept of a God-given universal moral law into the world. The Jew carries the burden of God in history, and for this has never been forgiven. Yeah, that's a nice quote, but I would love to see what underpins that. I'd like to go over this. Maybe I will take a break and come back and carry on with this. I have nothing better to do, and why not? It doesn't matter if people sit through it or not, does it? I have this feeling that I shouldn't post something that goes on for hours and expect people to sit through it. Like it's irresponsible of me. But this, I'm curious about this. I want to see what Prager says, and it excites me. It sparks my romanticism to discover what a charlatan he is, and what he's been up to, and what must be happening when those videos are being made. So I will take a break, and I thank you all for visiting part 1. And be good. Remember, God is a necessity, and don't let reason lead you down the immoral path. Shalom.